I got held up at gunpoint 3 or 4 times. Other people, were beaten violently and stuff, but it was worth it.
I was cooking chicken, but it burned. My husband come home and hit me, he say, I've never learned. I say, go to hell, and he say, what's that smell? I said, I was cooking chicken, but it...
Hello, and welcome to episode 19 of the Who Cares Anyway podcast. My guest on this episode is Mark Gergis. And where to start with Mark Gergis? Well, maybe the place to start would be Porest, P-O-R-E-S-T, which we heard a little snippet of there in the intro music, and we'll hear more excerpts of throughout this episode. But Porest being the more or less solo project that he has had going since, at least the early 2000s, although, as we'll hear in this episode, it arguably dates back to the 1970s. But in addition to Porest, there is also Monopause and Neung Phak, a group that he co-founded with previous Who Cares Anyway podcast guest Peter Conheim in the early 90s in Oakland. And for the same reason that I wanted to have Peter Conheim on as a guest, I wanted to have Mark Gergis on to get into some of that adjacent history, meaning adjacent both in space, with Oakland being on the other side of the bay from San Francisco, and time, with most of Monopause / Neung Phak's activity coming just after the period where the book ends. 1995 being sort of the end of the book, but Monopause / Neung Phak continuing into the mid-2000s. And then, as if that weren't enough, Mark Gergis has also been a key contributor throughout the lifespan of the Sublime Frequencies label. And that, in turn, connects us back to another previous guest, Hisham Mayet, guest on episode 6. And so there's some overlap in both of those senses, but how does it all fit together? Well, that was sort of a overarching question that I had coming into this episode that I actually almost forgot to ask, or did forget to ask, but we sort of wind our way through all these different topics, and then toward the end, Mark sort of brings us back to that question of, how does this fit together in terms of his original music under the name Porest and what he did with Monopause on the one hand, and then his archival / audio excavation work, unearthing and compiling music from far-flung parts of the world, from Southeast Asia to Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. One other thing I wanted to mention, Mark's brother, Eric, who is referred to a couple of times in this episode, had an accident, injury in the fall of 2023. I don't know the details, but I know that there's a GoFundMe that I made a little contribution to, and many others have as well. But there will be a link to that in the show notes. I think they've almost reached their goal, but the link, again, will be in the show notes, along with links to Mark Gergis's various Bandcamp pages with Porest, Sublime Frequencies, etc. And so I think that is enough background for us to get on into this episode. So without any further ado, here is my interview with Mark Gergis.
Well, I grew up in the East Bay in the suburbs. We lived in Oakland, and then in the early 70s, we moved to Lafayette, California, which is out near Walnut Creek. And it's there that I grew up, and the damage was done out there. So I came from a kind of a wildly normal but wildly crazy family at the same time. My dad's from Iraq. My mom is a woman from California, and she became a Seventh-day Adventist in the mid 70s, and grew up in a household where the policies were such that it was G-rated films only, and no rock and roll and that kind of thing. And I just got super obsessed with whatever I could get a hold of, in the world, and find in this giant world, just from the TV set, if I was allowed to watch it. So at some point I just realized I was nowhere, and I had a tape recorder, and I had a sibling, Eric, who I still collaborate with. We would do these kind of radio plays and play instruments poorly and just kind of do, weirdly scripted stuff for people on tapes and perform it on the fireplace mantle and that kind of thing. So it started at a really young age. I just released here's a plug. I just released a 19 Porest 1976, 1977 album up on Bandcamp. And that kind of cements or imagines that there was a Porest in the 70s, but I guess there was because it's just me. And Eric's on that too. But yeah, it all started way, way, way back then. And then, fast forward in the mid 80s or so, I just, kind of realized that I lived next to Berkeley in Oakland, and it was a BART right away. And I would just start venturing out there and, met a lot of great people, some at school, some out there, and go into San Francisco and just, blow my mind with music and literature and good psychedelics, and kind of force my perspective into something else at some point. There was a lot, it was a big world out there, and there was a lot going on I didn't understand politically at the time, in literary terms and in my knowledge of anything. I just felt really small all of a sudden, which is a great place to find yourself, I think, and just wanted to expand that and start learning and start, creating. I always wanted to create. I was always doing like cell animation or Super 8 films and sound and audio. So you end up gravitating toward people that do things like you do, and I was lucky to meet some other Californians, some in Southern California, some around me in school, and who wanted to do those sort of things. And so throughout the late 80s, in Lafayette and Concord, I had these kind of just balls out noise tape bands. We just do basically like, field recordings and then distort them through a Radio Shack line mixer. And, like this is in the late 80s, and add stuff to them and yell over them, or, do weird random, poetry that made no sense, or, that kind of thing. And just had a great time doing that stuff. And we were, super inspired by what we were listening to, and also what we couldn't hear, what we were, what ideas we had that weren't being expressed that we thought. So some of that stuff is obviously left better on those old tapes, but but we had a good time. And eventually that became a little bit more refined, we thought, in the form of like, using samples, or, I say samples because at the time samples were, it was pretty radical. It wasn't like, do sample, it was like more, you're incorporating your field recordings or stuff you get off TV, and, you'd hear that on Chrome records and stuff like that too, where, obviously, like you're playing with media. You had Negativland. Negativland blew my mind, accidentally, again, in the Bay Area, there's the blessing of radio. We pre-internet, 80s, you're a teenager and you're in your room in the suburbs. KPFA had a really strong station, and Negativland had that show, Over the Edge, for so many years, decades. And I accidentally tuned into that. I forget what state of mind I was in. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning on a Halloween, 1985. And I had never really heard anybody do anything like that with sound that clicked so hard with me. And these were the live shows they would do, just mania. A lot of them are archived. Right. I can't find that one. I've tried. But I think that sort of changed my life that night. I like those life-changing kind of influences and events, and they were certainly one of them. I was fortunate to get turned on to Sun City Girls that same year in 1985. A friend of mine, Ron Dillon, came up from boarding school in Arizona via LA, and he had that first record of the Sun City Girls, and we'd listen to that all the time. It's just, I was kind of like bombarded with all kinds of music that year. And it blew my mind, from, really deep stuff like the Girls or Negativland, or, to like kind of well-loved post-punk stuff like, Minutemen, Husker Du, and like, the punk scenes all over the place, super regional stuff I would get into. And it all just kind of made a lot of sense, just immersing in that. And I'm pretty obsessive anyway, so I get deep into stuff like that. And have I answered your question yet? No.
Well, yeah. And we can as they say, circle back. But I was going to interject one thing, because you sort of said something that I had already been thinking, which was, there's these two kind of traditions that are in your music, Negativland and Sun City Girls, and those are both these West
Oh,
Coast, very distinct lineages or traditions, and Monopause might lean a little closer to the Negativland side of things. Porest definitely has those techniques, but also maybe the darker sense of humor of, and some of the other commentary of Sun City Girls. And then I guess Sublime Frequencies. I guess you could say maybe Sun City Girls / Sublime Frequencies and Negativland, but those are both present. And so I was curious when you came across those. But hey, both of them in 1985.
pretty early on. Yeah. I mean, I went from listening to pop music a couple years earlier, just because that's what was on the radio or whatever, to English, new wave stuff I would hear at school as a 13 or 14-year-old, whatever the stuff you'd get on the radio that was like more, that showed you that there was something else, like even Devo would make it to the radio, or Sparks or something like that. And then you'd realize, oh, there's this, kind of quirky world, or there's this, or like, and I don't understand it, but I want to, and let's dive deeper into that. And or Frank Zappa, or obviously the world of music and sound in a pre-internet world. You've got your radio, you've got your television, and you've got your influences. I think that's a really astute. If you were my therapist and you just told me that it's a fusion of Negativland and Sun City Girls, I'd probably, yeah, you're probably right. I mean, it's because you click with what you feel is like-minded as well. And also then when you start doing your own work and you start taking that work a little bit more seriously, or at least working a little bit harder on it to try and make it do something, to turn on a machine that's you and it says something and expresses something, at its base level. Me anyway, I'd like to express or do something on a stage or on an album that I'm not able to hear, that I feel hasn't been expressed. And, I want to be proven wrong all the time. I want to go out and see something that I'm feeling and thinking about, but yet I don't often see it. So I have to do that. And that's kind of the feeling of with bands like Monopause, with more the conceptual, hijinks or presentation, or, whatever behind those outfits, like, or even my earlier band Screen Bread, which was a duo, with a guy named Doug Loswald. It was like a lot of loops and samples, and we did some performance stuff too. It's basically trying to pull off something that we would like to see on a stage or hear on a record, but we aren't quite hearing it. We're hearing elements of it, but I guess we have to get up there and blow our own minds, in addition to everybody else's. But it's about presenting something that isn't seen, that you feel. And so I feel there's a kinship there. There's and I found that in the kind of no rules, kind of anarchistic approach that both of those Negativland, Sun City Girls had, for sure, that it really defying everything that had been laid out before and showing that there are endless possibilities. There's no answers to any questions. There's, it's do whatever you want to do. It's not just a free for all, plink plonk. There's a lot of thought going on there, but it's also allowed to plink plonk around. It's also allowed to meander and do crazy things, and then turn on its head 360 degrees and be something else. And that was the most inspiring. Those are the inspiring facets of those groups that I think really did it for me, for sure.
Yeah, there's something I was curious, and something I had no idea about before doing some of the interviews for the book, was that the early days of 924 Gilman, there was the experimental music night, and Seymour Glass, as I know him, mentioned, going there on Friday nights, and that would be when Negativland or Thinking Fellers or those kind of bands or outfits would play. But did you ever see shows there in those, like 80s, well, I guess 87
I guess can you say the venue again? It dropped out right there.
Oh yeah, Gilman Street.
Oh, Gilman. Yeah, of course. I didn't see that. I didn't see the Negativland show or shows at Gilman, unfortunately. And I'm a little bit younger than some of those guys, just by a few years. And San Francisco, the Bay Area, was so stringent with fucking age restrictive shows. Like, you know, it was a death sentence to be into music before the age of 21 in the Bay Area in the 80s and 90s. And I missed so many good things because I know Gilman's all ages. This defies the purpose, but you know, I-Beam or, you know, a lot of those places, like they just, it was so prohibitive, man. I would try to like fight with the security guards, like, or, you know, become friends with them or, you know, bribe them, and nothing could work. It was, so that was really horrible. But I was able to see, you know, there was a place called The Farm. There were, you know, yeah, Gilman had some cool stuff that I saw. I would go to, what were some other venues in the 80s and 90s? I mean, I-Beam I snuck into a few times under 21. Stone, you know, yeah, there were a lot of them, and I'm getting older now and I forget. But, you know, and then also you'd have like weirdly curated nights at random places, or like, you know, a cocktail bar would do something, or Night Break, or God, where else? The No Theater, which was, yeah, that was a place that had shows too. But then you'd get like shows like a touring band like Public Image Limited in 1986 would come play, always with Faith No More and Camper Van Beethoven. You know, those were like the two opening bands. I think I saw Camper Van Beethoven about 30 times in that period of time.
Right.
And it was that early Faith No More, you know,
right.
Pre Mike Patton.
Yeah.
ATA, Artist Television Access, was a cool place to go in the 80s or early 90s, you know, for cinema stuff. Yeah, I would just, you know, when was a luggage store? See, now you get older and you lose the timeline of when things were.
Right,
but
right.
The Chameleon, these are ghosts, because, you know, I lived there so long and watched the whole thing die. And then you just walk by these old venues and think, hey, I saw a great show there, but it's now selling these weird, this like dog ice cream or something. Like, I don't really know what that is, but, you know, yeah, it's a wild thing.
When I interviewed Peter about a year ago, he was telling me about that stretch in West Oakland. And, you know, Hecko's was a place that I had a chance to go to a couple of times in the early 2000s. But what was the sort of timeline around that as far as monopause forming and then Hecko's and that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So what happened is I finally got it together to leave the suburbs, like around, I don't know. Yeah, it was April 1991. I remember it now. And I moved straight into West Oakland, not knowing anyone there. Moved in with a friend. And we lived on 8th and Peralta. And the landlord there, who was a cool guy in his 30s, you know, he said, you know, there's kind of a thriving neighborhood here, you know, amidst the chaos and violence. You'll find several, you know, really creative bands and artists doing all kinds of things. And we're like, okay, man, cool, you know. So we went there, and sure enough, you know, every night you'd hear these bands rehearsing and playing, and I got to know them really quickly. There were bands like, at that time in West Oakland, which we can come back to, as a very, very separate thing from San Francisco at that point.
Yes,
like very divided. Bands like Fibulator, who were amazing. Bands like Little My, I'm friends with these guys to this day. Lexa Walsh lived down there. She would end up running the nights at Merchants in downtown Oakland, and eventually her own Heinz Afterworld Lounge, which I'm sure you've heard about. And she was my neighbor. Rick Weldon was my neighbor there too, also an ex-Adventist, and he's married to Ann Eichelberg from Thinking Colors now. You had got so many bands down there, just, you know, bands like Amsterdam, Hamster Damage, Mingo 2000. You know, I can go on and on. And then you had like the legendary, like the Fear House, you know, where the band Fear lived and rehearsed. Just moved out before I came in, and that house like went up in flames. There was a band called Sinister Sisters of Satan there, and I think they burned the house down. But yeah, so many stories. There was also a theater there, an old vaudeville theater that God, the name escapes me now. I hate this, but it was my neighbor too, and they would host shows there, like Sleepy Time Gorilla Museum played there, and others, and they would have cinema nights, and it was just such a cool scene down there. You know, I got held up at gunpoint 3 or 4 times. You know, other people, you know, were beaten violently and stuff, but it was worth it.
Were a lot of bands rehearsing in their house? Would they live there and rehearse there, or was there a separate? Okay, I've seen a monopause, something on I think on either Porest or some kind of YouTube clip that looks like it's a house that looks well lived in, but also a lot of music equipment, and that's something that can't really be done in San Francisco.
No, especially at that point. No, no, it's true. I mean, so yeah, I ended up moving around different places in West Oakland and downtown Oakland until I finally settled in 95. I got this really giant space that we were able to play music in at all hours of the day or night. And that became my domain for the next 15 years. And that was directly across the street from Hecko's, which is
Okay.
lovingly called Hecko's Palace, which I think they hosted a show last week. You know, Hecko's still going. He just visited my
Okay.
brother in Detroit. But
Okay.
yeah, that whole scene was really, really something, and also very inspiring on another level. And in all of that, through friends, I met Peter Conheim that same year in 1991. I met him because I was on a quest to find this like song that had or this album that I'd known in my youth that had disappeared from my life. Didn't know the artist names or the music. Peter figured it out within about 5 seconds, and I just have him to thank for that. You know, to this day, that was Perry and Kingsley, the
Okay.
In Sound from Way Out,
Oh,
and I'd had that when I was 11, and he just knew right away, knew what I was talking about. He worked at what Astas Records at the time in Oakland, and eventually at a video rental store called Movie Image, and we just we hung out a lot, and realized we were into a lot of the same stuff, and started working together creatively, making recordings at a basement flat at one point in downtown Oakland and back to West Oakland. So we started just making music and sounds and kind of deep listening to stuff together, and ended up coming up with a plan to, I guess, I think Peter just booked a show and we came up with a name for the band. And that was in November 93, which is, oh my God, 30 years ago. I
right.
think it was November, like next week, it's 30 years ago. So Monopause had their first show at Lexus Heinz Afterworld Lounge. I think it was nearly around the same time that I saw maybe the last Heavenly Ten Stem show ever, which was the only Heavenly Ten Stem show I ever saw, where they were in plain clothes.
Oh, okay.
Sometime around that time, I don't know. It all gets mixed up. But anyway, yeah, Monopause started then. I think that we confused people by saying we were from Wisconsin. Isn't that funny? A little regional humor. But at that point, I think we were really into the Wisconsin dialect of speaking, like in Minnesota, and like, oh, let's go back to my house, and like that kind of thing. And this is before Fargo came out or something. I think we were just into these regional differences that were disappearing in the United States, and we had to come up with a fucking bio, like, okay, what do we say? And so then a lot of people really thought we were from Wisconsin, and there are genuine bands from Wisconsin. I mean, it's like, I think that's statist, isn't it? You can't just do that. You can't just, say I'm from that state. But yeah, sure you can. I don't know. Yeah, Monopause was, Monopause was Monopause. It was everything and nothing, and it was kind of funny for us to just start a band and do these shows, and we kept doing it, and it started developing and turning into something viable, and we started taking it a little more seriously, and then in Monopause parlance. It was a ridiculous group that just tried to do anything we possibly could to, entertain ourselves and confuse audiences and antagonize in a very, loving way to our friends. I mean, we were insular, like a lot of bands in the Bay Area. So, we never really toured that much. But we had a 10-year run of just doing a lot of kind of what we called situationist, performance, rock, theater, whatever. And we had these really high concepts that would get pulled off in the Monopause way, which means like something would always go wrong, but we built it was foolproof because nobody knew it was going wrong. It always seemed like it was part of the plan. So we kind of had this foolproof way of like, yeah, and if we played a song really badly, everyone thought we did it on purpose, but we didn't. And I loved that about Monopause. It was just kind of like this free for all in a way, but also had a very specific way of operating, and a rotating cast of really great friends and musicians that came and went over the years. And yeah.
Yes, I mean, when I really was seeing you all live, it was by that point you all were mostly doing the Neung Phak shows, if I'm not mispronouncing that too badly. But and then before then, as because I moved out there kind of midway through Monopause's tenure. I moved out there, October 99, and then it took me a while to find some things, and it was kind of through the Spock morgue, and I remember the Clit Stop and some of that stuff, and I sort of was aware that Monopause had this history, of, having been around, but I didn't really know much about it. And it took me a little while. But do you feel like, post whatever, post 2000, post something else, that that was a distinct era?
100%. I noticed a new era starting in 99 or 2000 with the Clit Stop and other, like Grux coming out of I was like, oh my God, is that Grux? I hadn't seen him in 4 years or 5 years or something, since the earlier mid 90s. Oh wow, these noise shows at the Clit Stop, and then, a lot of new people cropping up, and a new energy. I mean, there had been, like I just described, a scene in West Oakland that eventually petered out and dissipated, and people ended up moving away. I saw so many eras come and go, in the Bay Area, and I was pretty insular. I mean, like, I loved going to shows and seeing stuff and like being inspired, but I also loved just hunkering down and making sounds and music by myself as Porest or whatever, and dropping out of the 90s culture or whatever, trying not to, be influenced by trying just to leave the TV off and that kind of thing. Like, no cultural references for me. If somebody at work tried to bring up something they saw in Seinfeld, I didn't even know what they were talking about, or whatever. That kind of world where I just kind of built this world where it was all about the music and the, that lifestyle, and the cigarettes. But yeah, I think then it dropped. San Francisco had the post.com boom really was. It was just a weird thing to watch happen, and I felt like it killed a lot of the spirit that was there. In that way, made it unaffordable for people, undesirable. I was really proud of the Bay Area when people would come from out of town. I loved where I lived. It was a strange thing to realize. I know a lot of people don't love where they live, but it kind of felt like the end of the world after a while. It's just I was tripping over dead people and feces, and like, just looking at some horrible despair. It was getting ridiculous, and I think that it wasn't that conducive. There was a dead spot. And that's when I really turned inward, and Monopause really started honing our thing, and like, going full speed ahead on our insularity, and small whatever, 10 people that liked us. And then my brother and I said, let's go into San Francisco. I saw a flyer for a show. Let's just go check it out. Like around, I don't know, 99 or 2000. And it was at the Clit Stop. And that's when I saw Grux there, and I saw other people, and I was like, oh my God, yeah, where did this come from? And then very quickly that just exploded into, and this is my perception, I'm not, John Dwyer or like some other people who were probably in it, or Paul Costoros, who watched that whole transformation happen. I had kind of like given up. And I'm like 30 something, 32 or whatever. And I come in there, and I'm like, wow, this is again, like something is happening here. And Monopause kind of sort of integrated into that and became a part of that too. And we met some great new people, and that Oakland, San Francisco divide seemed to have narrowed. I had spent a few years traveling like in the Middle East and Syria, and spending a lot of time in Europe and Germany. And then I came back, and there was this. And so it seemed like there were just different influences, different attitudes now, kind of I don't know, there was a bigger commotion overall locally, I think, and a kind of a can-do attitude, about putting shows together at all times. There was always something going on. And that's when, you came in around that time, and yeah, I mean, Monopause just plodded along in our way, and met a lot of new friends, and a lot of offshoots started happening too. Relationships started with like Recipicent Records, Zeke Shack, and Brand Pause. Then you had Hans Grusel, and you had all these other kind of, man, there's so much. Yeah, I mean, then you had the Pink and Brown. You had everything. Kind of all kinds of things going on in San Francisco. I think it was an exciting time to be there, and it's a time that somehow, and I know this, I've noticed this covered in your book quite well, and in the people that you've discussed it with, but there's a sabotagey flair to San Francisco. There always has been. There's like I remember I went to Chicago in the late 80s, and I was talking to a bartender who had spent time in San Francisco, and he said, you know what, San Francisco, nobody gets anything done. And I was like, okay, yeah, interesting. So thought about it, and it's like, okay. And I took that home with me, because Chicago's got like the undisputable work ethic, right? So it's like the perfect thing for a Chicagoan to say. But in a way, like what he means is, I think, that there's almost a decidedly self-sabotage, or decidedly like, we're not going to do anything that gets recognized. We're not going to take this out of this room. Like, we're going to keep this so secret, and so, you know what I mean? And so I think there is something there. It's hard to, and I'm a California native, and I know this kind of like thing that happens, even, and even to the people that just moved to California, there's this centrifuge of kind of defeatism or something that happens. And it's not that it's a bad thing. It's a reaction. It's a reaction to something. And but it's decidedly not stagnant. It's very alive, but it's also like, and we will never tour another city. You know, we will, we'll make this album and then never press it, or like nobody will hear it, or it'll be like covered in dirt, or, whatever. Like there's something about San Francisco that makes certain groups of people want to do that. And it's been evidenced in your research and your book, which I've appreciated hearing. I think Trey had something good to say about that. I was listening to the Trey podcast or reading something he wrote. He kind of summed it up really well. I wish I remembered what he said.
Oh, right.
But does that resonate with you? I mean, do you
I
kind of
think,
find this?
well, I think a lot of it, when I started on it, there was something in this, a handful of things that I knew, and I didn't necessarily know how they connected, but I was like, what is this quality about this stuff that, it's like you said, it's not necessarily that it's a good or bad thing. I was like the Popo Pies. I was just finished editing and putting out that episode with Joe, and thinking about all of the different things. Like on the third record, there are two backwards songs
Right.
because there were engineering issues with the forward versions. I never even knew why they were backwards, but I just knew it's kind of one of those things that is both annoying and at the same time, you appreciate that it's part of
Mm-hmm.
what they do. And they never, whether it's Flipper or the Amarillo stuff, Sun City Girls, not being from San Francisco, but still has a lot of this quality. It's like they never make things easy for you.
Yeah.
And and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
antagonism, but it's at the same time, it's not just like they're up there abusing you in a sort of sadistic way. It's nothing like that. It's always hard to kind of, it's a push and pull. It's a thing, and I don't know that I'm any closer to being able to articulate it now than when I
Mhm.
started, but at least gave me an excuse to, talk to people and hear what they had to say about it. And
For sure. I don't think it's a negative thing, that antagonizing. That is, it's it's a device. It's not easy. It's not, it doesn't give too much away. It's not broad, but it's also not exclusively pretentious and narrow. There's something very giving about it, I find, and yeah, it's confounding for sure. And I think there's a long history of that there. I mean,
but that
yeah.
that's why I felt, and I think, I don't know, again, what you've heard or what you heard from, or what I left in the interview with Peter, of my own speaking. But I was saying to him that, when I moved out there, I had this idea of this music that I was interested in, but it was stuff that wasn't really happening anymore. And then what was going
Hmm.
on was interesting in its own right, but it just felt different. But Monopause, Neung Phak, I felt like was one sort of exponent of whatever that old, not old, that previous
Yeah.
tradition, that tradition. And I mean, you had like-minded people, but I think that what you all were doing was pretty different from Pink and Brown or a Total Shutdown or,
Oh
um,
yeah, 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 yeah. We had our thing, and we were, whatever that was. That thing was shifting all the time. But I feel, it was quite separate from that. We were definitely in our own world, and maybe we were more related to what had come earlier. But just by dint of being a bit older too, yeah. I mean, it was what it was, and we really enjoyed doing it. And people really, it's that era. People seem to really embrace what we were doing, and in a cool way. That we play the Stork Club a lot in the '90s or whatever, and just do, for friends and whatever. And then we just kind of built ourselves into some kind of monster that there were like a lot of demands that we put on ourselves to keep changing it up and keep doing things to defy the last thing. And whether anyone noticed this or not, but that was the internal, so it was just something we really enjoyed doing. And it did feel quite separate though. And going back to this like divide between the two cities across the bay, it's like in Oakland, we felt like we had the best of both worlds. We had Oakland and Berkeley, and we had San Francisco. That was all ours. San Francisco didn't feel like they had Oakland, or they would never come visit. They would never, they didn't understand what was going on there. All that vibrant stuff I described in the early 90s, very few people from San Francisco were coming over to check all of that out. Very strange how that shifted then. And then around that time, like that we're talking about now in the early 2000s, that had definitely changed up, where there were, there were bands playing both sides of the Bay 3 times a week or whatever, people coming, checking stuff out in Oakland or Richmond or whatnot. So I find that interesting. Very provincial, actually, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Well, yeah, I definitely had some times when I went to see shows in the East Bay. I didn't have a car, and I had some adventures getting back, whether you could find a ride or otherwise you're trying to take the AC bus and
Oh my God. Yeah.
and so
I've been there. I've been there.
yeah, there's for anyone listening, the BART runs, but it stops right around midnight, and so you'd either have to, I don't know, most shows wouldn't be over. Yeah, and then
No.
you gotta figure out how to get back, and if you didn't go over there that much, you wouldn't know your way around too well. And the bus would go, I think, once an hour, and then it drops you off at First and Mission, and you got to figure out how to get home from there.
Right.
And so I do remember getting home after 4 a.m. for some shows that I went over to, and warehouse shows in the East Bay. So that's part of it, maybe.
That's part of it.
It would be true. It would be true going in the other direction though as well.
Yeah, that was me.
Right.
Yeah. And it would drop you off in downtown Oakland, and you'd walk back to West Oakland, and you get there by sunrise or something. Yeah. Good times.
The first Sublime Frequencies project you did, was that the Cambodian cassette archive?
It was in there. I think that was the second one. The first was, I remember, Syria.
Oh, right. Okay.
That might have come out in November of 2003, the same time the first Porest actual CD came out, November 2003. And then Cambodian Cassette Archives came after that.
And you came across those cassettes mostly at a library in the East Bay. Is that right?
For that release, yeah, a lot of them came from the South, or the Asian branch of the Oakland Public Library, which was amazing. And they had a bottom drawer of cassettes that were kind of neglected because CDs were the thing, and these tapes were from an earlier era. Most of them were from the early to late 80s, and a lot of them were diaspora recorded recordings, made in the States, made in Long Beach or Rhode Island, or wherever Cambodians settled after the war. And same with the Vietnamese tapes that were also there that I was concurrently digging into. I would just go through these drawers and check out 6 tapes at a time and bring them home and take them over and transfer them, bring them back, and just super getting into this music. And in addition to that, I started going to a lot of the diaspora shops in San Francisco and Oakland, the Laotian shops, but the Cambodian shops were aplenty down. There was a little kind of like unmarked little Cambodia in East Oakland. I think maybe only one of those shops remains today, if that. And Thai shops. And I would start going in there and meeting the people that ran the shop and just asking questions about the music and just like getting deeper and deeper into it. And that kind of really became an obsession too. And then, I was also traveling. I'd traveled for my first time to that region, to Southeast Asia, with my brother in 2000. We went to Syria and Jordan and Lebanon and stuff, but we spent a few months in Laos, in Burma, in Thailand, etc. So started really, really digging into the music. And obviously on my travels, I'm always getting tapes and bringing a radio and tuning in and, doing the same thing, asking merchants questions about the tapes, learning about these styles and taking them home and kind of like processing them and getting blown away by them. But for the Cambodian Cassette Archives, yeah, so it's a combination of tapes I found at those shops and tapes in those drawers at the Oakland Public Library. So yeah, I'd been putting that together for a few years, and I think my obsessions with all of that started just kind of in the mid 90s. Going to libraries were such an incredible place to go before we had phones and internet and stuff, remember? Yeah, it's just like I'd spend hours at libraries and in the music section or in the book section, and or even looking at microfilms and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's where I would kind of lose myself and get get super into certain sectors of music, starting with, whatever was available on the global music labels at the time in the 80s and 90s, but then really wanting to dig deeper into that. And when I heard this diaspora music that was coming out from the Cambodians, it really affected me. I really, really, really enjoyed it. And I felt like it really needed to be heard. And, I was lucky to meet Alan Bishop and Sun City Girls and the whole crew, Rob Millis and everybody else. Hisham Mayat and I had met in San Francisco a couple of times in the late 90s. But through friends, I was a big fan of the Sun City Girls, but I'm not the kind of person that like seeks people out because I like what they do. Whatever. I just enjoy what they do. So I never really imagined that we'd be partnering up and, becoming pals and, helping kind of form this label and do a bunch of releases for them. That was incredible. And, we had a lot to talk about with our different radio recordings and field recordings, but also especially just about this music that we were hearing on our travels that didn't seem to have any kind of exposure or, nobody seemed aware of these sounds, more and more like the street sounds, the raw stuff you'd find on tapes, which is kind of how Sublime Frequencies came to be, just the thought that why isn't this heard, and can this be presented to, a different kind of audience?
Yeah, Trey would tell me about some of that. He told me about Prince's Nicotine before it was reissued. I forget, before it was a Sublime Frequencies. I don't know what it was before then, and he would
tell was on Majora.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he would tell me about and I would go over to some of these shops in Berkeley, really not know what I was looking for, but I have a few things I got, cassettes of Ananda Shankar in particular, 2000, I think 2001. Some of that stuff I really got into, but that's in a way, that's another thing that I came to realize was this I don't know, alternative ethnomusicology, this maybe that's not the best way to put it, but between Hisham, the rest of the Sublime Frequencies people, but also, Secret Chiefs, Heavenly Ten Stems, for whatever controversy was there. It was all sort of, it's not this, it's decidedly not quote unquote world music, but it's also, and maybe I've made too much of a big deal of this, but I just find it interesting how, as the so-called underground music of the 80s is becoming big mainstream rock in the 90s, so many people were turning to these other sounds, other eras, or other places for inspiration, or I don't know exactly what there is to say about that. It could just be coincidence there.
No, it's very true. I mean, I felt insatiable with music, and I felt like I had exhausted everything I could in Western music. I mean, I had grown up listening to Arabic music by default, with all my uncles and my dad, and it wasn't as foreign a concept to me at all to be hearing Kulthum or anything like that. That was kind of like this base level up until I was about 10 or 11 years old, in the background. But it was also something I kind of with America's kind of unspoken forced assimilation, I don't know, it's something that you're embarrassed of. You come of age and you don't want to be seen as something, you've seen how people are treated from other places, right? And you don't want to be that. You want to fit in with the clan. And so as going through puberty and like kind of coming of age at that time, it's the kind of thing a lot of people at that time wanted to run away from. The music of their parents, if their parents come from the Far East or from, wherever, that it's not just the last thing you're going to put on, when your friends are over. But, coming full circle, just falling in love with music in every dimension, trying to hear as much music as I possibly could from, everywhere. I don't know. When I started traveling and immersing in non-Western music, it just felt like this giant, unobtainable world, with rife with, mystery and secrets, but quite normal for the people who are living it, right? But it was just me that was in the dark, and I just wanted to hear it all. And I don't know, it's weird these times. What interests me is like how it all gets processed. You end up presenting this to a Western audience too, with a label like Sublime Frequencies, and the letdown about like post-internet YouTube archaeology, where everyone can watch everything from any continent at any time now, and get a crash course on any facet of any culture. It's a great thing on one hand, but it's also, I don't know, I feel like it's kind of like just dulled a lot of things out and made this kind of static thing that where it's made us believe there aren't any more mysteries, and if there are, we're going to find them, god damn it. And as if the point was to kind of like hurry up and demystify the world, and then classify it as such, and kind of like I guess how colonialists would put things in museums too. It's like, all right, now we know what this is, this animist thing, it served this purpose. It's a strange thing to present, but it's also, I don't know, I'll speak for myself, but I'll speak for the US here, being originally from there myself, and I left 10 years ago now. But where there doesn't commonly tend to be a lot of thought about the rest of the world on a broad level, and that's a dangerous thing. There's like this inherent insularity there that, I don't know, despite all the talk of being a melting pot, which in America, which is true on one hand, it seems to silently kind of reinforce this invisibility. Kind of it like it perpetuates this lack of interest, or a reinforcement of irrelevance when it comes to East Asia, or elsewhere in the non-Anglo paradigm, I guess. And so I mean, I have some experience in that sector. After years of invisibility, the Iraq War, for instance, and then 9/11, these brought like kind of a sudden negative visibility for Arab Americans who, like Iraq was a tourist destination when I was a young kid. It was kind of this exotic, place where flying carpets were or whatever. I think the cocktail generation was still kind of getting over their holiday to Baghdad. But I partly blame that ignorance and the lack of visibility, like that invisibility, on something super destructive, because when something barely exists and you don't see a relevance to it, then it's super easy to demonize it overnight and eventually just kind of like sideline it or destroy it, right? So there's kind of an engine there in me that knows that, and that feels that, and it kind of works its way into the way I present this stuff too, or that I try to anyway.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there. I'm thinking, that era, the early 2000s, I actually went to a show on the night of 9/11. Crack was playing over at Covered
Oh
Wagon
yeah,
or something
yeah.
like that.
I
400
might have been there
blows.
too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I certainly had no context to what to make of things. And I know that I had an uneasy reaction to tourists when it came out, but it turns out that that was really effective, because you're not most of the time you're not there with a guitar singing pedantic songs with lyrics telling people
Right.
what to think. It's much more subtle, and it also reminds me of something Alan Bishop said. I think I quoted in the book, where he talks about the idea of a character, and it gives you a little bit of something to play with. It's kind of like you are a character is Porest, but obviously, it's a fuzzy dividing line between that character and you, but clearly there's a lot of you in that character. But dealt with these topics, some of these topics, in ways that I haven't seen or heard many people do. I mean, it's hard to do so intelligently, but also in a way that
Mm.
isn't just a complete buzzkill. To do so with some humor, to leave some openings for people to was he joking about that or not?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it can be very, political work, arts and work can be very off-putting and pedantic, and you don't want that if I mean, yeah, I don't know if I even consider myself, political or an artist. I don't know. I mean, but politics is in everything. Obviously, I, I'm galvanized by things I've witnessed and things that I consider to be important, and things that I kind of see in people around me, or at the time I was making those records, that nobody's thinking about this in the same way. It's shock value on one hand. Your reaction to it is I'm sure other people had that reaction to it too. I mean, the artwork alone, but it's not necessarily obscured. It's quite overt, but then there's a fine line between, I guess it's up to the maker at that point, how they're going to present this. I'm usually turned off by political records, in a lot of ways. I don't know. It's like just by the sheer, just how pedantic it is, or how kind of preachy or soapboxy. So you have to kind of subvert it in a way. You have to kind of, yeah. Alan says, a character can be a good device. That's true. There are all kinds of ways to embody it and try to make urgent or relevant work. You don't, it's also, you're also kind of dooming it to a certain time. 9/11, isn't going to happen every day. Or is it? I mean, I think maybe we're still, I think it just happened a few weeks ago, to be honest. But, it's, I don't know. I go back to those records sometimes. And as much as I don't really love listening to my own stuff, I do return to it to just kind of see where it sits, especially that stuff, that kind of Porest that goes there. And I'm pretty happy with it. I think, or I'm pretty unhappy that it's still does this. I still feel the same way, or that we're still dealing with a lot of the same issues that made me want to do work like that.
At that time, 2016, if you take that Porest album, has a long title. What is it? Popular Guide to.
Oh, I like that one. It's called Modern Journal of Popular Savagery.
Modern Journal of Popular Savagery. Yeah, popular. Yeah, and then the Tourists are kind of bookends of that era. And I was rereading your interview your interview for The Quietist that you did around the time of that album, and you were saying it might be irrelevant in a month, but maybe it'll be relevant later on. That's kind of how I've been feeling recently. But I thought it was very timely. And then the next thing you know, we're off into this whole other thing with the 2016 election. Yeah. And then whatever has happened for 6 or 7 years. But then, we're kind of back we're back.
We're back. Yeah, there's just we're back. We're always back. We're making like 100-year loop at this point, it feels like. So, right. I don't know what we're returning to, but it's kind of like you're shooting yourself in the foot doing a record like you can imagine. I mean, I didn't think of it at the time, and I don't care, but it's ultimately, I'm sure a lot of people are turned off if somebody recommends Porest somehow, and then they come across some of that material, which is aplenty, sprinkled throughout the records. There's a lot of that. I'm sure it's a real turnoff to people because it's not meant to be polarizing. It's not even meant to be shocking. I don't know what it is. It's just an expression. So it's like I kind of play with the concept of being on a soapbox or preaching, just like I play in Porest with other themes of even like misogyny or self-delusion or narcissism or inflated sense of self. I mean, these are kind of common Porest themes that I don't know if anyone gets the joke but me, but is it a joke? I don't know. It's just expression, and it's just kind of that's what I think music should be. I think it should be working with the times like that. I don't know. Part of that is like, going back to the 80s for a second, I'm like one of those guys now. So like in the 80s, all these guys that were saying back in the 60s, it was right. Like, now here I am. But back then when I was quite young and coming up, it's weird, like subculture. And in the Bay Area, it was pretty apparent. So my young mind thought, and I've shared this idea with others that agree, you see a person who kind of dresses a certain way, they're listening to this kind of music, you're going to assume that they've got similar politics and worldviews to you, as you are also coming of age and learning about politics. Politics is really intimidating to get into when you're a kid. If you don't go, if that's not your, like what do you have but what your parents and your environment gave you? That's it. And unfortunately that leaves you bereft of anything really. Like you don't have good context. History isn't taught that well in high school. I mean, if it's taught at all, like some version of history is taught, right? But where do you start though? Like how do you even? It's so intimidating. I think a lot of people just avoid it. It's too complicated. That's. I'm here. This is my world. America's a safe place to be in a way. It's a construct that it's this kind of like, it is a bubble though, and the Bay Area is a particular bubble. It's literally at the end of the world. It's like. That's you look at where it is geographically, it's the end of the world. It's like the end of the continent. And then you have Asia again, it goes in a loop. But it's like, how do you even start? So, I don't know. the Iraq wars, the first Iraq war kind of, galvanized me in some way, but I took a look around me and saw the kind of apolitical, you know what, like the kind of thing, well, why do you know, like, oh, did you hear what happened in Korea today? Why do you know somebody in Korea? Like, what would it matter to you? That's a line that my sister got at the office once, but politics were extremely polarized in the US at that time, and even more so now. I mean, the kind of polarization we have now is next level. Like in the last since I've left the US, it's like I can't even compute it. But then in a different way. But it was also like, these signifiers I was talking about with people, you kind of figure, hey, that person's going to be into this kind of politics, read these kind of books. And it's kind of like, subculture was this, and there were so many like splinters of subculture. That's all been obliterated now. I feel like subculture doesn't mean anyone can be wearing anything, and it doesn't mean anything. It means, or they're a total fascist, or, whatever, they got a nose ring. It doesn't mean shit, right? They're wearing a meat puppet shirt. Doesn't mean anything, at this point. So it's like, it kind of got crumpled up into something, but also it was somehow cooler to be apolitical, and that was kind of it kind of enforced in an unspoken way amongst music scenes, at least, that and that was the kind of exact climate that got me really riled up in my art and music, and eventually with my Iraqi and Syrian work, presenting that stuff too, and the diaspora music work for Sublime Frequencies. But making those albums felt relevant, but I also felt like the room was empty. I wanted to see 100 bands doing stuff like that, but then you just get, I don't know, who's the big like mainstream political band? It's not Queens of the Stone Age. It's oh God, help me, Will.
Rage Against the Machine.
Yes, thank you. Rage Against the Machine. Yeah, Rage Against the Machine. That's right. You get that, and then that's a huge turnoff. Listen to that music. It's like, who's going to be into that? Somebody. But again, these are important I believe in gateways. There's like gateway drugs for music, for cinema. For that, you can't fault anyone for getting into Rage Against the Machine when they're 13 or 14 or 16, and they have a rage, and they want to rage against some machine. Tell me about this, right? And so that can lead to things, right? But that it feels and felt important to me to do that. I don't know if I should give this away, but it's already been done. So on October 28th, Porest did the only public performance that I will do this year at Cafe Otto here in London, and I decided that I was going to psychically assassinate former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, and I had 20 minutes to do it, and I had the help of Peter Conheim, who is a Kissinger expert and CEO of H1 Dreamseer, which has this beta kind of platform that's going to help me hone my psychic skills. And so I had 20 minutes to do it, and I failed. But we can only try, right? And so when Kissinger dies, I think I'm going to release that video and blame myself for it. And it's fun. It's fun to do that stuff, and it's fun to put that anger somewhere. And the anger is real, and the cognitive dissonance is real, and commentary on that level of fucking cognitive dissonance that we're seeing in the last 10 years. I mean, somebody's winning this war. You know what I mean? It's like, I've never seen a more polarized time. And I thought we were kind of headed somewhere different, even in 9/11 times. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I thought you expressed, or Porest expressed on that album, whose title I mangled, the disillusionment, the disenchantment with the sort of slogans and the sacred cows, like the democracy protest. And that's 2016. And what have we heard? We're constantly told about threats to our democracy. And yet when 80% of the public is even just asking for a ceasefire, the Senate is saying 100-0 or 99-1 no. And it's like we don't have. So what democracy? These are like these platitudes, and even poking some holes in those balloons is something you don't even hear that much. But it's almost like you're, or Porous, because it's a character, is the bearer of these, the one who is acknowledging the elephant in the room, and that other people are like, why do you it does make
why do you got to do that, man? We were just coming to have a good time,
buzzkill.
It's so stigmatized. And this is another thing, like within subcultural talk, I don't know if I really got that across the way I wanted to, but within that also you have like very tribal stigmas almost in the States, where identity is a big part of that, and we work really hard on cultivating our identities, right, as a youth and coming of age and college age, and then being an adult and what that means, and what I am, what I believe in. Here's the music I listen to. Here's how weird I am. Here's how weird I'm not. Here's what I do. You know what I mean? All that stuff is like very important. And out of that comes a hyper-focused, kind of rugged individual way of processing and thinking tribally in a way that's like, I don't know. That's where we get this kind of polarization. I think it's just on steroids, next level polarization in that way. And at that same time, then I felt like politics got very stigmatized. If you go to a demonstration, which, we can all agree really doesn't do any good. They're going to do whatever the hell they want, no matter whether 500,000 or 5 people show up to a protest. They're laughing at us, right? Like it makes sense to show that there are bodies that care about this event, but there's an impunity there that supersedes that. I think we're beyond like a march at this point, right? So the democracy protest, and I felt that way before, and I feel that way this month as well. But I think, unfortunately, it's easy to stigmatize. It's like what Santa Cruz did to reggae and dub music. When you think about, or what Berkeley did to politics. Like, oh, I'm not a person that goes to the protest, or I'm not a person that does any form of activism. I'm not a person. I don't do politics. That's a privilege. How do you not do? I guess but I know what they mean. You don't have to do politics. You can just kind of, I don't know, do something else, right? Like it's a privileged place to be, and to not do politics. And I guess people are just enjoying their privilege flagrantly. But I feel that what I'm trying to get to is that, political music also then finds a very hard place. Music that is political or touches on politics without abstracting it too much or obscuring it, or like in the guise of a love song or something, like light politics. Like, other than that, like, it gets really relegated, and it works with those stigmas really work against it. So like the places that we've put all of those things, into these compartments, I think it doesn't help us move forward. And it also helps keep people, it also makes people avoid entering into that arena. But I just felt like, whatever, I have nothing to lose. And a lot of that Porest material is as like, I don't know, as bombastic as it sounds, is probably just like emo at heart, really. You know what I mean? It comes from a humane place, and a place of real humor, and real disdain, and all of that. So it's just kind of a strange cocktail, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was, not to bring everything back to the book, but the places where the humor blurs into something else, and it's both at once, whether it's dark humor or the tragic humor or something like that. It's you certainly wouldn't call Porest comedy, but again, I wouldn't file it in the political only bin either, because there's always more that's going on. And certainly, I was thinking, just as you were talking there, what does politics mean? I mean, you could sing a song about voting for this candidate, or it could be something like Sublime Frequencies putting out music from, pop music from Iraq in 2005 or 2004 or whatever it is,
Right. Right.
that was, you talk about countercultural in the 2000s, that was important and countercultural, but also not in a reactionary way. It was just kind of, yeah, I don't know.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. I'm glad it was taken that way by you. I mean, speak for myself, with that work, I'd say the motivations, there was a politics to releasing that stuff, and there was an urgency in releasing stuff from material from Iraq, from Syria, at that time, heavily demonized. We were, I'm not part of it, but the country I grew up in, we're pummeling Iraq, just pulverizing Iraq, and it's. Yeah, I mean, there is a politics in there for me. Each of those releases were political, and there was an approach to working with music from the Arab world that was really just kind of spawned by my growing awareness of American foreign policy, and then finding ways of operating in diametric opposition to that, and to the myopic kind of that apolitical numbness that you can find in the States at that time, or and maybe that's changing now. I don't know if I'm very qualified to talk about the States of today because I've been gone for so long, but maybe the younger generation, but particularly at the onset of the two Iraq wars and the insidious, post 9/11 mindset. And I don't know, just watching the destruction of Iraq through war and sanctions, and as someone who'd spent a lot of time in the region, getting to know Syria and whatnot, and then watching the demonization and the constant ignorance, about the country and the region, there was that sense of urgency to release music from these places, to kind of disrupt the narrative or present a narrative where they're, to present music and culture, from a world that was obscured or abstracted intentionally, even, and dehumanized in the West. So that is a sense of urgency that guided the work, especially with the Iraq and Syria releases, for sure. And Omar Suleiman as well fits into that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And you were back and forth between you were spending a lot of time in Syria in particular in the 2000s, right? And because I was in that Quietus interview, you mentioned that you noticed some things that seemed off, and you were there a last time in maybe 2010. But I don't know if you've been. Yeah, but what all what all were you doing there? I mean, what can you tell us about your time in Syria? In how many times did you go over there, and how much time did you spend there?
It would, yeah. I mean, I think it started in '97, late '97. I went to Syria for the first time, and I was really into Syrian and Iraqi music and learning more about it. And I thought, that was one drive. And I was learning about the Syrian communities that lived along the Kabul River in northeastern Syria. And I just wanted to go out there. I didn't feel I could go to Iraq because I felt like I might be conscripted into the military at that time, but I really regret not going at that time, in Saddam's time. But I went to Syria and really fell in love with the place. And then, I always say this, and it really moved me. So it was a game changer. And I went back as often as I could. I went back 4 times or so, and then I was getting into the tapes I was bringing home. For instance, on the musical side of things, Omar Suleiman was something that I brought home in '97. I 5 or 6 tapes. I went back in 2000, got a lot more of his tapes because I just really loved the urgency of the sound. And it was just my brother and I and some friends and like Chris Cones and some other people listening to that stuff, for 7 or 8 years before the idea came about, going to propose making an album or a compilation to him, which we're lucky he said yes to, and all of that. But yeah, so I would go to Syria and Lebanon and the region quite often, and it became a part of my life. And I would get apartments there in Damascus 3 months at a time. It's a fantastic place, and it was really fucking heartbreaking to watch what happened. Which happened starting around 2011. 2010 was my last trip there. And then my wife and I moved to Vietnam, to Hanoi, for a few years around the time that Syria was just descending, and then ISIS came up, and Iraq was descending, and the world was getting really, really weird and sad. Lived in Vietnam and Malaysia for 5 years, and then relocated to London, which is where my wife is from. So I've been here for the last 5 years. But yeah, in the interim, I started something called the Syrian Cassette Archives, which is at SyrianCassetteArchives.org. It kind of speaks for itself. It's a place to share, document, research all these hundreds of cassettes that I got over the years. And it's a growing collection. We're going back in. I was supposed to be in Syria in 3 weeks for my return to Syria, but due to what's happening in the region right now, and some of the stringent policies, like I'd have to have a tour guide in Syria, it's not conducive to getting the work done. So I have a Syrian partner who's going to go in. We're going to Jordan, and we're going to bring the Syrian guys down from Syria to bring some tape decks to them. We've got 1,000 more tapes out there in Syria to digitize and archive, and that's been a really cool project. It's kind of like, even like I say, letting go of the curatorial steering wheel of these kind of releases I've been doing of compilations, and just kind of broadly making a lot of this music available that and kind of collating it and telling stories about it and interviewing people who've done work on those records and or distributed them or did the art or whatever. I mean, those are really interesting stories to us, and we're learning so much, and it's kind of a way to hopefully, all of the kind of like demographic shifts that can happen with war, been violently displaced in Syria. Like music may never sound like that again in these parts, and we're over here. Like the people all moved to Europe, or they got out, or they're not making music anymore. Traditions are lost. So that project kind of upholds that, and that's something I'm super into doing these days.
I did see that you had that Porest show just a few weeks ago, and I don't know if that Henry Kissinger thing was the full extent of it, but what else was there? Anything else involved in that show, and or are there additional things on the horizon for either Porest and or Mark Gergis?
I mean, Porest continues when I can, when life doesn't get in the way. It's something that always just, I feel drawn to. As long as it calls me, I'll do it. And it's a slow machine. And always, it's not always going to be a record like Tourist or Modern Journal of Popular Savagery. I mean, some of them are just fun or stupid, or like an amalgamation of all of the above, or moody. But I have 3 or 4 records in the can that I'm working on and slowly and piecing together. But the Kissinger show was a one-off. It's just something I pulled together. I was invited to do a festival for Vicki Bennett. People Like Us here does a kind of like residency at Cafe Oto. I've done 2 of them with her. Wasn't sure what I was going to do. The idea came up before October 7th, but then of course the show was a complete incitement to murder of a head of a state, right? So with such a fervor and determination, but it was pretty funny to me, like it was great. But I think I could feel that it was like it was tense in the room, and I think it might have shaken a few people up. People were laughing, and everyone hates Kissinger. It's easy, but I think the point of it was that there's a power dynamic that doesn't exist, which would allow Kissinger to be prosecuted for war crimes. It just doesn't exist. So I was going to have to take it upon myself and be a vigilante and psychically murder him in his sleep in Kent, Connecticut, from afar. But I mentioned Palestine. I mentioned Bibi Netanyahu. I worked him into the lyrics. I mean, I made it speak to the times, but it wasn't overtly this. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on that is overtly now in this, that like Radio Al-Hara in Bethlehem, which is like a collective of people from all over the world working on like Palestinian-centric programming and awareness on this stuff, mixing music with speeches and with context, which is lacking. So yeah, I mean, what's next for Porest? I mean, yeah, I'll just keep going, and I have plans to keep doing it. Life gets crazy and puts a stop on art sometimes, and money becomes a problem, whatever, life, sickness, illness, everybody, stuff like that, all that fun stuff. But yeah, I mean, you did ask me, I don't know if you want to touch on this, but you did ask me about the cultural work I do versus Porest, and I had to think about that. I remember in a chat, and probably don't have any time for that, but
no,
I was just going to say that yeah, you were saying like, where do you make the separation? I can't remember what you said in the chat, but I took a note of it, and I was thinking about it, and I think it's, Porest is something that that's as much me as the cultural work that I do. It's the same person, but there's a decidedly different approach. Whereas Porest is like a personal project, which in a lot of ways is this, informed by radical sound art and music and cinema and shock value, but it can also be novel, or bombastic. And in that way, I always think about keeping it separate from the more like cultural, human, or collaborative cultural work I do. It's a different hat altogether, but I can't escape that it's still me. And those worlds kind of intersect sometimes. Like for instance, in Porest, I do compose with field recordings, but I can turn them upside down and shape them into something unrecognizable, or change their agenda or the context of them into something, when it might have been something quite lighthearted originally, turned into something really insidious and dark. And I take liberties with Porest, that are different than the approach I can take with cultural work that I feel that's a self-imposed thing. I add context that wasn't there. I remove context to serve a like a nefarious purpose, play with themes. or I role play the worst human beings you can possibly imagine doing unspeakable things, and whereas I'm not going to do that in a release where I'm trying to present Iraqi music or Syrian field recordings. All of that's allowed in Porest, but with a field recording album like I Remember Syria, it's a tribute to the place and the people, and even though I'm employing kind of Porest editing approaches, and there's a little bit of the violence in the edit, and there are political statements in the jump cuts, and the way kind of, I think anyway, on a micro level, and all those techniques creep in, but there's a line drawn by me where I'm not going to do a disservice to the country. And in my opinion, I want to honor the country and honor its sounds and stories, and knowing that it's going to be a document that somehow preserves a period in time and a place that's important to think about. So there's thought given to that process. Yeah, that's kind of just something I wanted to say about it.